Right. Today we have another excellent lineup. We have Patience Young, Richard Spencer, and Steve Gardham for our entertainment and elucidation. But don't forget, we're not meeting in June. So the next meetings will be the 10th and 24th of July. We've got the Limerick conference coming up later on in June. I hope a lot of you are going to be there online if you're not in person. And then we're going to have a fortnight off, the second June one. So July the 10th and 24th. So please, if you're not on the TSF newsletter, if you're not a member of TSF, then please do join us so that you get the newsletter and you'll know when the next meetings will be. Because from now on, they might not be every fortnight. When we come back in July, they might be a bit less frequent. So without further ado, Patience is going to be our first speaker today. Are you ready, Patience?
Good morning. I'm ready. I'm lining up. Here we go.
Over to you.
Okay. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, the suspense is killing me.
Practice 5 minutes ago.
Tell me about it.
There we go. We've got that.
Okay, good. All right, here we go. Yeah. The abolition movement in Britain in lyrics and pictures. 5 songs from Dick Holstock's book, Again with One Voice, bring attention to the abolitionist movement in Britain, a struggle within the larger context of political reform to attain true democracy for all. As with other broadsides devoted to topical issues, these songs could have been sung at certain clubs and public houses, at private gatherings and meetings. All but one were almost certainly written by white abolitionists, although their voices are those of Africans. All 5 of these songs were written in generalities, and their dates are not always known. They do not reference specific events, places, or, with one exception, individual people. Their messages are nearly interchangeable. The Black man has been wronged and deserves rescue from his plight. Recognize and support this. Both enslaved and free Black people lived in England, but the economic driving forces of slavery that fueled vast fortunes in England were the plantations in the Americas, far from the eyes of most Britons. Perhaps that is why these song lyrics are so generalized. Slavery was an abstract wrong. In popular images of the time, dark faces are not found in the crowds gathered for reform issues, political rallies, welfare lines, sailors in mutiny, marketplaces. The occasional oil portrait of a pale patron features a dark attendant. But while this underclass of former Africans existed in England, as it did throughout the empire, it was poorly represented in images and text. These 5 songs concern the predicament of that underclass. Abolition in 18th century England referred specifically to ending the slave trade, not slavery itself, not full emancipation, but with the expectation that ending one would achieve the other. These 4 landmark dates may be familiar to you, but they were never part of my education in the States. I'll return to these dates along the way. I just need to get rid of this for me. Okay, good. My talk presents pictures roughly contemporary to the songs, each shedding light on the other. Engraved prints made after oil paintings indicate public interest in their subject. I've paired painting with print where possible and played a significant role in spreading news and messages. Forgive me for whatever blunders I offer today. This is new material to me, fascinating and troubling and provocative. Okay, come on. Thank you. Hear me, free Britons, to my plaint give ear. My tale in many a place would force a tear. For whilst I tread the freeborn British land, and whilst before mine eyes white freemen stand, vain, vain that glorious privilege to me, I am a slave, where all things else are free. An African's appeal sets our scene. It solicits the good will and sense of white Britons and was probably penned by one. The song is not dated. Its message is both timeless and anchored in the early years of reform agitation on many fronts. In May of 1772, 250 years ago this very month, Chief Justice Lord Mansfield, William Murray, ruled that a certain human being, James Somerset, could not be exported as property and sold elsewhere. The Mansfield decision established a legal foundation for the abolition movement in Britain. This ruling set a precedent that reformers would build upon for more than 6 decades to attain legal freedom for all Black people throughout the empire. We can look directly into Lord Mansfield's home for a true story of unusually good fortune. His nephew, Sir John Lindsay, a British naval captain, sired at least 3 children while sailing the Caribbean. Lindsay's daughter, Dido Elizabeth Bell, was born a slave and as a young girl came to live with her great-uncle, Lord Mansfield, at Kenwood House, Hampstead, where she was a companion to her cousin, Lady Elizabeth Murray, who also lived there. So here they are, cousins, young women of privilege and manners, both literate, both cared for by their great-uncle during and after his life. Did Dido's presence in Mansfield's household inform his judicial rulings? Much has been written about his legal decisions and his reluctance to muddle property rights with human rights. Our second song is Yankee Doodle, or the Negro's Farewell to America. This song was published in London 3 years after the Mansfield decision came down. It is decidedly not the familiar ditty Yankee Doodle that crossed the Atlantic as a jest and was embraced by the colonists. It is voiced by an American slave who anticipates the pleasures of freedom to be enjoyed in England or perhaps back home in Guinea. Now farewell, my massa, me missy, adieu. More blows or more stripes will we e'er take from you, or will me come hither or thither me go, no help make you rich by the sweat of my brow. Yankee Doodle, dandy I vow, Yankee Doodle, bow wow. The lyrics mimic a patois that is painful to read. The tune is nearly unsingable, leaping a major seventh to a high F sharp and changing time from 3 to 2, but we're lucky to have its original tune at all. And while the song is in the key of A, the notation at the bottom for guitar is in C. It's hard to imagine where this song was sung and by whom. It is not a serious political song, but rather a small-spirited amusement. I have not found any images that reflect these lyrics with dignity or sympathy. The Mansfield decision would have ramifications in the American colonies, where slaves of rebel masters were offered their freedom to fight with the Tories against the Revolution. After the war, thousands of former slaves who had been loyal to the Crown were sent to Nova Scotia, and some went on from there by choice to Sierra Leone. Theirs is a complex story not mentioned in these songs. Here is a rare watercolor of a freed man at work in Nova Scotia. The African's Complaint was also known as the Negro's Complaint. The lyrics were written by William Cowper, and I'll return to him shortly. It resembles a hymn, not only in its clear cadence, but also in its references to the power of a Christian God. Is there, as ye sometimes tell us, is there one who dwells on high? Has he bid you buy and sell us, speaking from his throne, the sky? John Newton, author of the hymn Amazing Grace, exemplifies personal reform. He had been a slaver, a sea captain working the Atlantic Triangle trade, a capable businessman outwardly undaunted by the horrid conditions and cruelties under his command. Then he quit that occupation and later became an Anglican minister. He did not speak up publicly against slavery until late in life. For many years, Newton collaborated with his friend, the poet William Cowper, in writing, collecting, and publishing hymns. When, in 1787, the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, ceased, was established in London, Cowper was requested to write or revise the poem that became the movement's anthem. Slaves of gold, whose sordid dealings tarnish all your boasted powers, prove that you have human feelings ere you proudly question ours. With ceased, the abolition movement became visible. Quakers had started this work, distributing texts to promote the cause, but it was the academic clout and personal drive of Thomas Clarkson, an Anglican, that got the ball rolling, along with other key figures, including Granville Sharp. Ceased stimulated massive petition efforts, inspired a huge boycott of West Indies sugar, but not, alas, of coffee, tobacco, or cotton, and led William Wilberforce to present abolition bills to Parliament again and again for 2 decades. The movement had a song written by a noted poet. It found its voices, its advocates, its people. The emblem for ceased, "Am I not a man and a brother?" was designed in the workshops of Josiah Wedgwood. Known for his distinctive ceramic ware, Wedgwood was an abolitionist with means and influence, a successful manufacturer. He was also a master of marketing and gave away hundreds of these medallions. People wore them to show their stand on abolition. An eloquent argument for freedom is found in the autobiography of Olaudah Equiano. He had been born of high status in the Kingdom of Benin, was captured into slavery and shipped overseas, and eventually purchased his freedom, became a visible and vocal abolitionist in London. He promoted his book vigorously through several editions and to great acclaim. It remains a valued testament on the life of a former slave told in his own words. Another well-documented 18th century figure was Ignatius Sancho, who had been born on a slave ship sailing the Middle Passage, was later a freedman who owned his own shop in London and was the first Black man in England to vote. He was a prolific writer, an actor, and apparently a gifted composer. His book on music theory is now unfortunately lost. More typical on the street in London was the unidentified household servant, as was this young man painted by John Singleton Copley. Such a fresh, open portrait is unusual for the time. Also by Copley is The Death of Major Pearson, a grand drama from the Battle of Jersey of 1781. The primary figure of action is Pearson's manservant, known to us only as Pompey, who shot the sniper who had shot the major. The painting is not about slavery, but its subtext confronts the issue, a compelling case for equal opportunity and capabilities. The first British anti-slavery painting was George Moorland's Slave Trade. Moorland is known as a painter of milder sentiments. Even in this charged scene, there is little passion in gesture or expression. But the subject itself shocked viewers who saw it exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1788. It was made into a colored print 3 years later, and several variations of it exist, indicating that there was a large market for this image. The most chilling evidence of the slave trade was the diagram of the slave ship Brooks, first appearing in 1789. Thousands of copies in various formats circulated in Britain and abroad. It endures as the most concise, damning description of shipping human cargo. It spoke and speaks volumes. Back to our song. Cowper's poem attracted sustained attention. A portfolio published in 1798 cites this song's fourth stanza on its first plate. Fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skins may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. The abolition movement surged and stalled for decades, while foreign wars and troubles at home took their toll on British resources and attention. Finally, in 1807, the Abolition of Slave Trade Act was passed. Around this time, Henry Fuseli painted The Negro Avenged, his dramatic scene of a grand African couple witnessing a ship struck by lightning. The next year, it appeared in print in a volume of Cowper's poetry, along with the seventh stanza of the African's complaint. Hark, he answers, wild tornadoes strewing yonder sea with wrecks, wasting towns, plantations, meadows, is the voice with which he speaks. The Voice of Africa appeals to Britain as a nation that embraces freedom. The first four stanzas are presented as the voice of Africa. O Britain, thou chiefest of isles in the ocean, where freedom and wealth with the graces now dwell. To thee, sable Africa pays her devotion. O heaven of the earth, pity Africa's hell. But the fifth stanza responds to this appeal in the voice of Britain's national conscience. O Africa, cease all thy wrongs we have pondered, though long we ill-treated thy sons on their shore. Like demons, not men, we thy treasures have plundered, and worse, these foul infamies brand us no more. This final stanza situates the song after the passing of the Abolition of Slave Trade Act in 1807. When Britain outlawed the industry of trading slaves, it began to police the oceans to force other countries to abandon the practice as well. The main abolition voice in Parliament was that of William Wilberforce, who had brought bill after bill to the floor without success. Finally, the tide turned within the walls of government, and other advocates, for reasons virtuous or political, rallied to the cause. There's much more to the saga than I can relate here or that these songs reveal. This commemorative medal of 1807 celebrates the victory. Wilberforce is the friend of Africa. Britannia is attended by Mercury, Prudence, and Justice, with victory flying overhead. I have heard their cry. Negro slavery. Here's the broadside sheet from Dick's research files. Who stood forth in time of need, who did so nobly for us plead, who wished the Negro slave was free? 'Twas Wilberforce, 'twas he. Negro slavery is the only one of these 5 songs to actually mention any of the heroes of the anti-slavery movement. Member of Parliament William Wilberforce, gentleman, man of faith, philanthropist, blind to many inequities, but a persistent advocate against slavery. His name was better known than that of many others who contributed to the movement. He had retired from office when this portrait was painted and may have died before these lyrics were written. For more than a quarter century after the slave trade was legally abolished in 1807, full emancipation remained elusive. Now's the time and now's the hour to Parliament petitions pour. O Britons, pray exert your power to set the Negro free. In the 1820s, a surge of activity, particularly by forceful British women, raised new awareness. One of many who contributed to the anti-slavery movement was Amelia Alderson Opie, a Norwich writer and poet who joined the Quakers and in 1826 wrote The Black Man's Lament, a book for children on the sugar industry in the West Indies. Her book may appear tame in relating the harsh realities of slave plantations, but some of it is strong stuff for young readers to take in. It was surely intended to expose children in comfortable English homes to issues swirling in the discourse of their progressive adults. Then rouse ye Britons, struggle hard, petition all with one accord, and heaven will be your just reward for feasting of the free. Only after the Reform Bill of 1832 passed was the Slave Abolition Act of 1833 also passed by newly seated MPs who had been elected in part for their stance on slavery. The black man in this commemorative medal, Liberty Proclaimed to the Captives, appears triumphant, but like the 1832 Reform Bill, this act was deeply compromised. The act awarded financial compensation not to freed slaves, but to their former owners. Freed people were bound for several years to transitional labor that nearly resembled slavery. There aren't words for these injustices, nor are there any good pictures of this resolution to share with you today. There may be songs to be discovered. Perhaps you already know of them. Thank you.
Wonderful, Patience. Thank you. Sorry, you caught me unawares with your reading there. Do you want to unshare your?
Yes, I will unshare.
That was fascinating. I was absolutely absorbed with that. I had no idea.
Nor did I. When I got into this, nor did I.
And there's obviously a lot more to discover. The way the songs intertwine with the politics and the history. I mean, that's wonderful stuff. So, and we have a few minutes. Patience was very good on timekeeping. So, anybody want to ask a question? Don't forget you go down to reactions and click on raise your hand. Conrad has a question, and then Steve. Conrad?
Yeah, John Newton, he's quite a character. He wrote Amazing Grace, had this competition with Cowper to put together this anthology. But you have to remember about Newton is he was really more of a politico-social person than it makes out in his work. When he had his first parish on November the 5th in the evening, one of the houses burned down. And they took after him and ran him right out of town. He had very little skill with the parish. But anyway, that's just an anecdote. One of my favorite stories about the man behind the Amazing Grace.
Thank you, Conrad. And as Patience, as a couple of other people have mentioned, I think Cowper was pronounced Cooper.
Right, Cooper.
Sorry, Martin. Yes, Martin got me corrected on that at one point.
Cooper blooper.
Steve, your turn.
Yeah, it's not a question. Just reminding people or our American friends that we actually held a TSF meeting in Wilberforce House with William Wilberforce only a few years ago in Hull, where I come from. I was brought up with William Wilberforce. I've spent many hours looking through the broadsides in the Wilberforce Library and still have copies of many of them. Yeah.
Great. Well, I hope I did him justice somehow.
Absolutely. Well done. Yeah, great Patience.
Thank you, Steve. Lisa.
My aborted dissertation that I was working on was looking at naval impressment and the transit of black sailors, many of whom escaped from slavery into the British Navy and into the American Navy and into the American, basically, merchant marine, and were traveling back and forth into the British waterfront communities. And actually, there was quite an active waterfront agitational life among sailors who were passing black literature, not Equiano, but things like Walker's Appeal back and forth, black arguments for freedom, and some talk about going to Sierra Leone. There was quite a lot of discussion amongst them, and I'm surprised that they didn't appear into the broadside literature, because there was an active sort of sub rosa black waterfront life on both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, it may be there in the literature. It just doesn't happen to be in the songs that Dick chose for his book. And I wish I could find, I don't find images of those at all. The naval mutiny images are all later. Yes.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we're going to have to
Thanks,
hurry
Lisa.
up because
That's
we've
good
got
to
lots
know.
of questions. So, Dick, a quick question or comment. You're muted. Here you go.
I will take a short time, and that will be to say thank you very much for patience for expanding on the stuff that I put together, and that's all we could squeeze into the book at that time, and so that's what we got. But this is so nice to see it going further forward, and I hope we'll see even more develop as time goes by.
And we need a volume 2, of course. That's what we need from your book. Ian, your last question from Ian.
Yeah, one song that has been recorded in tradition, and I've recorded it, is The Slave's Dream. Now, I know this is outside your period, I realise this, but I just wondered if, in fact, anybody else can find any of these songs in tradition. Patience, if you've noted any songs about slavery and about slaves. Obviously Robbie Burns' song comes to mind, but anything else would be fascinating to know.
Thank you.
Patience, did you want to say?
I'm writing down as fast as I can, Ian.
All right.
And I will look into Robbie Burns' song. I was just in Robbie Burns' country a couple of weeks ago.
Great. So thank you, Patience, for a great start to today's sessions. We're going to move on to Richard Spencer, who's going to take us to the workhouse, along with Cecil Sharp.
Workhouse, I want to know about it.
You've got to mute yourself, Dick. That's it. Okay, Richard.
Are we ready? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just do the sharing business. That's that one. Okay. So the talk I'm going to give is entitled Songs from the Union, the Folksong collections of Cecil Sharp in the English Poor-Law Workhouses, 1904 to 1923. Oops, just click into the box and we go onwards. Okay, the project began when, in tidying up my song notes, I realised that I sang 4 songs, as shown on this slide, that Cecil Sharp collected in workhouses, or the parish union bastilles. I started looking into Sharp's workhouse collecting, and seeing the scale of it became curious. Cecil first visited the workhouse in search of songs in Langport, Somerset, on the 12th of March 1904, 7 months after his Damascene meeting with John England. He collected 4 songs from Jane Weller there. His last workhouse visit, on the 21st of September 1923, was to Headington Workhouse, where he collected 3 songs from Martha Truby. This was 10 months before his death, and these were the last songs he ever collected. He visited 30 workhouses through the period and collected in total 340 tunes to 255 songs from 93 singers. As the research progressed, I became interested to know if Sharp targeted workhouses as readily accessible sources of elderly singers on tap, or if he visited them for other reasons. By 1907, Sharp had decided it was a waste of time to call on singers under the age of 60, and that the last generation of singers had been born not later than 60 or 70 years ago, say 1840, and that these singers were to be found among the non-educated or common people. Given that the workhouse was the only resort for many of the poor when they were past their working years, these institutions would seem to be an ideal place to look for qualifying singers. And did Sharp find them? And what sort of songs did he collect? I'll take a brief look at the workhouse system, just enough to provide a background for the talk. The picture at the top left of Marylebone Workhouse, shown on this slide, demonstrates something of the scale and dehumanization associated with these institutions. The prosperous residents of a parish had, since the days of Good Queen Bess, been responsible for the support of their paupers. This support was mostly given as out relief, the provision of money or necessities of life to enable the poor to live in their own home. But this was supplemented in the 17th century by indoor relief, where food and accommodation were provided in workhouses in the expectation that the able-bodied recipients will provide unpaid labour in return. The many cases of abuse of the system, mostly by the relief providers themselves and by employers, and the rapidly rising costs of providing out relief led to the Reforming Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, by which parishes were grouped into poor law unions and required to provide a workhouse in which food and shelter would be given for labour. Almost all out relief was stopped at this time. To prevent the workhouse from becoming a desirable hotel for the poor, the principle of less eligibility required conditions inside to be worse than the worst conditions that could be expected outside. The workhouse system demanded hard physical labour, supplied poor food, clothing and accommodation, and required the separation of families. Horror stories of neglect, mistreatment and abuse were common during the period right up until the system ended in 1930. And it is said the poor law authorities did not deny these stories as they helped confirm the union as a place of last resort. And it worked. Robert Roberts noticed that among the different social strata of the working class of Salford, that workhouse paupers hardly registered as human beings at all. My wife remembers her grandmother's reluctance to go into Crumpsall NHS hospital in the 1960s because it had once been the workhouse, as pictured at the bottom left of this slide. By the time of Sharp's first visit, conditions in the workhouse had improved somewhat, particularly for the elderly. Labour was no longer required, not even light domestic labour around the house. Although the food was still bland, there was more of it, clothing was better, and conjugal accommodation was theoretically possible, if not common. With no work to do, life in the workhouse was tedious in the extreme. One inmate says, "Sunday is not a pleasant day in this house of ours, but as it is in all its weary dreariness, so it was intended to be." An inspector in a Kent workhouse found a group of worn-out men with nothing to do, nothing to cheer them, with nothing in the world to hope for. In another room are seen huddled together a number of old, exhausted women, clean, tidy, but speechless and deserted. They were wanting nothing, asking for nothing, waiting for nothing but their own death. The photographs on this slide of elderly residents in Shipston-on-Stour Union in 1911 show people reasonably well cared for, but looking apathetic. One or more of these individuals may be among the 6 singers that Sharp met there between 1910 and 1912. Card games were allowed, but no gambling under any circumstances. Tobacco could be purchased or bartered for, but beer was, if they were very lucky, a Christmas treat. But what entertainment, and in particular singing, was present in the workhouse? By the time of Sharp's visits, austerity in the workhouse had relaxed somewhat and occasional treats occurred, in particular at Christmas, or as in this picture of Headington Union at public occasions such as the coronation of George V in 1911. At Lexton Workhouse, the master's daughter recalled a Christmas party was held with an impromptu concert where year after year some of the inmates sang their favourite songs. There was much enjoyment, even if little musical talent. Songs remembered by the author of these reminiscences were The Old Rustic Bridge by the Mill, When I Touched My Seaweed I Knew It Was Going to Be Fine, and The Mountains of Mourne. Other accounts recall the inmates' pleasure at singing Sankey and Moody hymns at Christmas. An inmate's account of Saturday night in the vagrant dormitory of Poplar Workhouse around 1885 describes what we'd call a session after lights out. A few stories were followed by singers, each one calling on the next for a song. A man called Mac is called on for a song, and after a few more whiffs of the pipe, he clears his throat and obliges in a rich, mellow voice and in right good style with the old musketeer. Then one Jack Blades bursts forth into a grand old sea song with the right sort of chorus, commencing a long, long pull and a strong, strong pull, and does it ample justice. Some music may have been played in the workhouse, although possessions were routinely impounded pending the individual's departure. John Mason, pictured here at the bottom right, retained his fiddle and was able to play for Sharp in 1907. But none of the accounts of workhouse life I have found describe the inmates routinely singing in the way Sharp asserts the rural worker was accustomed to. nor did the accounts mention the kind of songs that Sharp discussed in some conclusions. So to return to Cecil Sharp's collecting in workhouses, let's look at the workhouses that he actually visited. On the map here, you can see that there was spread the length from Newcastle to Redruth, if not quite the breadth of England. East Anglia and South East were not visited, nor was the Northwest. Clearly and unsurprisingly, his core collecting areas of Somerset and the Cotswolds are overrepresented. The institutions varied greatly in their design capacity, from Marylebone at 2,000 inmates, Newcastle at 800, down to Stow-on-the-Wold and Dulverton at about 60. Most seem to have housed about 200 people. Two workhouses, Marylebone and Newcastle, can be classified as urban, but the rest, even though some were in larger towns like Taunton, had catchment areas that were more or less rural. So how often did Cecil visit the workhouses? This chart shows the number of collection trips made to workhouses by year. Between 1904 and 23, he made 90 visits. One year he made 29. For the 6 years between 1915 and 1920, he made none. During the majority of these years, Sharp was less focused on the collection of English song. From 1907, collection of dances became his priority, whereas during the war years, he was based primarily in the USA. Overall, this doesn't look like a concerted campaign to target workhouse residents. Was this because the workhouses did not actually provide a ready source of elderly, uneducated singers? How many singers did he find in the workhouse? Were the workhouses really nests of singing birds? If so, it appears that he did not fully exploit them. This table lists the number of singers Sharp found in selected workhouses and the percentage of the workhouse population this represents. In each case, the percentage is low. Only at Ross-on-Wye and Bridgewater did he collect from more than 4% of the residents. The overall percentage across all the workhouses is only 1.4% of the inmates. It is unlikely that he emptied his singers either. One singer, John Murphy of Marylebone, gave him 30 songs, 7 others more than 10, but the average was less than 4. I think this requires some explanation. If the elderly population of rural England, and these workhouses were largely in rural districts, were the last generation of the singing birds, we would expect to find many more singers than this. In fact, given the residents were enduring such a tedious regimented life, it is likely that if Sharp stood up in the workhouse at breakfast time and shouted, "Who can sing me a song?" he would probably have been overwhelmed, particularly as he had, by their standards, a well-filled purse and tobacco pouch. Did Sharp find that the workhouses were a productive source for song collection? In Sharp's biography, there is a table of his song collection activities by date range, which shows the date, number of visits made, and the number of songs collected. And this forms the top left-hand corner of the table here. The bottom right-hand of the table is the number of visits made to workhouses specifically and the number of songs collected there. Interestingly, the results show that the days spent in workhouses produced rather fewer songs than his trip to rural villages. On average, the number of songs collected per visit in the field was 4.4, but in the workhouse was 3.7. So if Sharp was expecting his workhouse visits to provide a significant boost to his collecting productivity, then he would have been disappointed. Okay, so let's look at the sort of singers that Sharp found in the workhouses. Using census returns, as on this 1911 sample here, it is relatively easy these days to find out a fair amount of interesting data about the singers Sharp met. I'm indebted to David Sucklett's excellent website, Cecil Sharp's People. I only wish I'd found it earlier in the research, as it would have saved hours on Ancestry. I found census records for 80 of the 94 singers, mostly from the 1911 census, and would probably have found more if I was prepared to pay the fees for the 1921 census. The census gives the age and occupation, which I've used to get some idea of how the singers fitted into the profile Sharp was looking for: elderly and uneducated. So this shows how old the singers were. The chart shows the number of singers by birth decade. This near normal distribution almost looks as if Sharp had intentionally sampled his singers, although this was certainly not his intention, nor did he do any analysis on it. The average age at the date of collection was 71. But looking at this data, it is clear that just less than half of the singers Sharp met in the workhouses matched his age criteria. So what were the singers' occupations? Although occupation is a very accurate measure of educational status, it will do better than any other data we have. The occupation of Sharp's singers were disproportionately unskilled labourers, although, as Alfred Williams points out, many agricultural labourers were very far from unskilled. But other misfortunes could lead to the workhouse, and among the singers we find a silversmith, a thatcher, a tutor and an insurance agent, mostly single or widowed men who had no family or none that would support them. So again, it is likely that many of these singers were as uneducated as Sharp's model required. Excuse me just a second. So to summarise so far, 337 songs from 90 singers, 94 singers, 90 visits to the 30 workhouses over 19 years. This is a small part of Sharp's total achievement, nonetheless one to be proud of, particularly for a family man with a teaching job and fingers in many pies. In his 1907 opus, Sharp laid out the type of person he is expected to be able to produce the kind of song he was looking for. And in workhouses, he found singers, at least 50% of whom were born before 1840, and 59% whose occupation made it likely they had little contact with formal education. So to this extent, his workhouse trips were successful. But what can we say about the kinds of songs he collected? Well, one way is just to use what Bert Lloyd called the folklore specialist instinct or common sense. We would expect to be able to distinguish between the kind of song Sharp's 1907 book described and songs derived from current commercial performance. I've tried looking for patterns in the data, but sorting the songs by singer's birth date or occupation classification did not, to my mind, produce a discernible difference in the types of song sung by older or younger people or by skilled or unskilled workers. A difference can certainly be seen between the songs collected in the two urban workhouses, Marylebone and Newcastle, and the others. The songs differ, though, not so much because of their musical or other recent commercial origin, but in their country of origin or their association with the sea. Marylebone housed several Irish singers, in particular the most prolific workhouse performer, John Murphy. Charles Robbins, an old sailor, supplied him with 13 sea songs and shanties. And in Newcastle, Sharp found two singers. One was a Scot from Banff, and the other was again a retired sailor. So look at what songs from the workhouse that Sharp actually published. In his workhouse collections, there are 134 full sets of song words, 39% of the total collection. However, he published relatively few of them. Sharp published 34 songs only from his workhouse haul, just 10% of the total. 4 were published in the Folksongs in Somerset series and 1 in English Folk Carols, and the rest in the Journal of the Folksong Society. This is significantly lower than the 22% published of his overall collection. As noted above, the Marylebone workhouse inmates gave him a good number of Irish songs and sea songs. 17 of these songs account for half the workhouse songs he published, and all of them appear in just 2 articles in the 1914 edition of the JFSS. Several of the Irish songs were printed with some learned discussion of the airs and some comment on the rhyme pattern, but only 4 songs are printed with the full text. After one song, Sharp remarks, "There is no need to print the rest of the words." And later on, Maud Carpelli's left out all but the most beautiful from her collection of Sharp's songs because they were alien to the English culture. The sea songs from Marylebone and Newcastle were treated more fully, with complete text given for most of them and some discussion of their working context. Okay, so I'm trying to make some kind of analysis of the type of song and do some comparisons with other data sets that will give me some idea of how frequently the songs occurred in the tradition. So the other data sets were the list of songs collected 6 or more times by Sharp in Behrman's 2002 article, and the list of songs in the new Penguin Book of English Folk Songs. 59 of the 340 songs appear in the first list and 128 in the second. More interestingly, if the comparison is made by workhouse, for those workhouses where 10 or more songs were obtained, the data confirm the subjective analysis made earlier, in that the songs collected in Marylebone and Newcastle differ significantly from those from the other unions. A correlation with the number of songs with high round numbers also shows the same pattern. But overall, excluding the Irish, Scottish and sea songs, it seems that the songs that Sharp found in the workhouse very closely resemble the songs he collected elsewhere. It's clear that Sharp selected his material during and as part of the collection process. On the 28th of August 1905, he visited Bridgewater Workhouse, where he collected The Brisk Young Widow, round 2438, from George Radford. It was the only song he took from George, and he later published it in Folk Songs from Somerset, volume 3, 1906. And in the notes to this publication, shown on the slide, he states, Mr. Radford began by singing me a large number of composed songs of the last century, which were, of course, not what I wanted. Of all the tunes that Radford sang to me, this was the only one which showed modal influence, and that is some evidence of folk origins. George was 76 at this time, but nonetheless, his songs were not acceptable. The Brisk Young Widow was the only one of his father's songs he could remember. This was the only song Sharp collected in the workhouse that day, and it may be that in the process of wading through the mass of unsuitable songs accounts for the relatively low productivity of workhouse collecting. Okay, so coming to an end, what conclusions could we try and draw? I don't believe that Sharp targeted the workhouses as a major collecting resource in the way that George Gardner appeared to do. If he did, he would have quickly concluded that he was not recording more songs in these institutions, nor were they very different or more interesting than those he collected in the field. However, he persisted with his visit, except for his years in America and despite his preoccupation with folk dance in his later life. Of the 130 songs Sharp collected in the last 6 years of his life, 60 were collected in the workhouse. E.C. Court's paper on Sharp's sword dance collecting notes that Sharp was in Grenoside in Sheffield on Saturday the 27th of August 1910, left there on the Monday, was collecting around Gateshead that evening and around Newcastle and Gateshead the next 2 days. He wrote to Mrs. Gatty, his hostess in Grenoside, that I have had a very strenuous time of it since I left you. But during this almost frenzied dance collecting activity, there was a day on which it rained so hard, so we went off to a workhouse to collect songs. He was not a man to waste a day, even if the rain put off the dancers. I believe that he visited the poorhouses opportunistically as a way of making use of time between his other projects, a spare day after pursuing a dance, judging a competition, or his many other activities. He may not have vetted his singers before his visit, but he certainly vetted their songs during the collection. And I find this typical of this very energetic, focused and driven man with an instinct that the most passionate of collectors would admire. Okay, and finally, this slide shows the Headington Workhouse, which was the last Sharp visited, where in 1923 he collected his last 3 songs. It was sited a few hundred yards away from Sandfield Cottage, where he met William Kimber in 1899. So his collecting journey had come full circle. Many thanks for listening. I hope you found something of interest. I would like to acknowledge the help I've received from 3 websites, David Sutcliffe's Cecil Sharp's People, Peter Higginbotham's The Workhouse, and of course the round index on the VWML website, without each of which this research would hardly have been possible. Any errors, of course, are my own. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to supply notes and slides and the data for this talk. Thanks again for listening.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Richard, that was great. I like the fact that we've had slavery and poverty.
Right.
And then next we're going to go on to war. So let's
3 horsemen of the apocalypse.
cheerful
A
stuff.
cheerful
Right,
day.
any questions? And thanks again also, Richard, for keeping to time. Conrad, as always, got the first question. Hello, Conrad.
I think the workhouse should provide a very interesting comparison and contrast between life in England at the time and Ireland. It sounds like a fascinating study to see how cultural freedom or denial was accomplished in each place. Irish, of course, complain about conditions and freedom, and so you should see quite a contrast between the collections. The next interesting point is you wonder how long did he spend in each place? Was he there for a day, 2 days, camp out overnight? Well, that would have a great bearing on the number of songs brought back, of course. So you probably want to look for clues as to how long he was there and include that in your calculation.
Yes.
That's it.
Sorry, carry on. Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't got any data that suggests how long he was actually in any given workhouse, any more than we've really got any information of how long he actually spent with some of his singers in the field. It looks as if places like Marylebone, where he went an awful lot of visits, because they were local, it's likely to be fairly short visits. In some of the others, more remote ones, he probably spent the day there. It's very hard to tell that, unfortunately. So it does leave a bit of a gap in the analysis of how many songs per hour he could collect.
And that would come from perhaps looking at personal communications, letters and notes and whatnot you might have made.
Well, I think, yeah, there is a lot more I could do on that, but I haven't got that far so far. So yeah, there's a lot more we could look at.
Thank you, Conrad. Mike Pedersen.
Have I done that? Yes. Yeah, I look at stuff in Teesdale in the north of England, and on the 30th of August 1911, Vaughan Williams visited the Barnard Castle workhouse.
Yeah.
Collected 5 songs and a couple of tunes. He didn't name the person that performed. And I've always thought that was possibly out of some sort of respect for someone because they were in the workhouse. I don't know. And I also don't know if he visited any other workhouses, whether that was his way of doing things. And even why he came here, I can't believe he just sort of wandered into, I mean, Sharp, it seems, targeted places, you know, and went out. I don't think Vaughan Williams operated in the same way, but perhaps someone in this group can put me right on that.
Well, Vaughan Williams certainly went to other workhouses collecting songs, particularly in East Anglia. So that sort of covers that one really. But Sharp in particular, looking at the workhouses he visited, I suspect mostly it was dance-led. So they visited Newcastle, Whitby, other places where he was collecting sword dancers. And like I said before, a lot of it was around the Cotswolds, where he was obviously collecting Morris dancers and so on. So I think it's more to do with he was targeting other things, but the songs he sort of snatched at when he had a moment.
Thank you, Mike. Dick, you got his hand up? You're muted, Dick.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I just wanted to say that unlike many of you, had a grandfather who lived in the poorhouse in Maidstone in Kent. And he had all kinds of weird songs to teach me as a little boy that he learned there. And it's had a tremendous effect on me. When I look back at what it had on the whole family that were incarcerated in the Maidstone poorhouse, it continues to have an effect on me as it does probably on so many other people.
Did you, just to ask you a question back, did the songs you referring to, did they refer to hard times in the workhouse or difficult conditions, or were they just children's songs that came from there?
Most of what I remember, the songs that my granddad sang, were songs about hope for the future.
Yeah.
And he was a very happy kind of a guy, and had great big family later after getting out. And but he was a working man, worked on the farm all his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was one of the things I noticed, is that I didn't find a single song that was saying the workhouse is horrible, why am I here, anything like that. There's nothing like that at all.
I've come across a few over the years that stuck out to me about working on the what do you call it, the treadmill.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a prison, surely.
Yeah. Yeah, right. That was really a prison, but it was also used in poorhouses, in those days. But we talk about the being over in 1930, but that really wasn't the case. In my case, during the Second World War, I sang in the local workhouse in near Sittingbourne,
Right.
And my choir at the church always sang there, and that is another thing. I remember sitting there and watching those people in those horrible grey, hodden grey clothing that I'm sure was itself a torture.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure it was. Yeah. It's just from the pictures I've found in various places, the basic clothing looks appalling to wear, and a lot of people complained about it.
But I remember all the time we'd see groups going out to work during the war, in long lines of people in those grey suits, just with their heads down, sort of huddling along on the streets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good job that's all over, eh?
Indeed. Very true. Yeah.
We do have to move on, although one small thing about the stigma of the workhouse, I remember as a local studies librarian, it was quite common that people would, doing their family history, would come across birth certificates of ancestors, which gave an address for the birth, which they didn't understand. Queen's Road, Croydon, because it was the workhouse.
Yeah.
But the birth certificate never said born in the workhouse.
Yeah.
Or born, it just gave the address. And it was clearly a deliberate policy that you didn't label the child as a workhouse child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. That was splendid. And we're moving on to our last presentation for today. It's Steve. Now, Steve promised us the First World War and the Second World War, but he's warned me that we might not get to the Second World War. We might indeed have to have another session to finish off the wars before they provide the Third World War for us. So, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, a bit of my own background first of all, because that has some relevance to what the songs that I'm going to be singing and the area that I'm talking about. So, for 4 or 5 generations back, my ancestors were farm labourers and plough boys and things like that in a place called Wetwang, and we're just waiting for the map to come up. Martin, if you can pop the map up for me, we can, there you go, yeah, okay. Yeah, if you look in the middle of the map there, in between Beverley and Market Wheaton, you've got a letter G there. That is Gardham. That is as far as I know, the only place in the world called Gardham. And there's about 3 houses and that's it. And it's right smack in the middle of the high wolds. And that red shaded area on the map there is the wolds, the Yorkshire wolds. And you've got the Holderness to the east of that. The Holderness Plain, which is a flat boulder clay area. And then to the west, you've got the Vale of York. You can see York there on the map. And very different agricultural area on the chalk upland, which is thin soils, often growing wheat. And on the more sort of craggy surfaces, you've got sheep farming as well. So quite different from the low-lying areas to the east and the west of that area, which is why you've got those market towns on the edges there. Driffield, one of them higher up there, Beverley and Market Wheaton. And that's all very relevant to the talk, really. As I say, if you look at the W a little bit further north there, that is the place called Wetwang. And if we go back about 4 or 5 generations, my ancestors were plough lads and farm labourers around that area. In this area, as in most areas going back to just before the First World War, horses obviously were the supreme. I think I've seen a statistic where that round about that time there were more horses than people in this country, and in fact about 6 million horses were sent to France, to the trenches in the First World War. And if you've got that many horses going, you also need lots of people who are skilled in managing horses. And that's exactly what the area of the Wolds was. They had lots of fellows who were skilled wagoners and ploughmen who were skilled in dealing with horses. And they were used for carrying goods to the front, to the trenches, and also to draw the heavy artillery. And if any of you have seen either the film or the play or read the book of War Horse by Michael Moore-Pergo, you will know all about that, the importance of horses at that period. There's a little bit further north from Wetwang on the map there, you can see the letter S. That stands for Sledmere, which is a large estate, and my ancestors worked on that estate as well. And the chap who was the man who owned that estate was at the time was a fellow called Sir Mark Sykes, and he had been a military man, and he anticipated the outbreak of World War I. And he set up, before World War I started, he set up a group recruitment of the ploughmen and the wagoners, and it was called the Wagoners Reserves. And they were employed for 1 year. They were paid for 1 year, but of course, once the war broke out, they were actually sent over to France, and then they became part of looking after the horses in the war zone. When they came back from war, they brought their songs back with them, and songs that were to do with the wagoners and the dealing with horses. And now to come back to me again, I started my teaching career and taught in the same school for nearly 40 years. And if we go back down the map a little bit to Beverley, it was just on the outskirts of Beverley where I started my teaching. And whilst I was there, one of the older teachers there, we had a gardening unit. Because it was a rural school and it catered for children from the outlying area around on the Wolds, in fact. They had this gardening unit, and it taught them sort of rural skills and how to grow things and stuff like that. And the teacher, Ted Kirk, who was obviously quite an old man then, or coming towards retirement, the letter K there, you can see on the map, is a village called Kilnwick, or pronounced Killick, and that's where he came from. And he'd been brought up in his youth with the returning soldiers from the Royal Artillery and from the Sykes' Wagoners Regiment. And he had picked up their songs. He'd spent a lot of time with them, and he'd picked up their songs that they'd sung when they were out there in the trenches. So he'd learned some of their songs, and the first song is Route 163, The Jolly Ploughboy. And I recorded copies of this from, as you can see from the top there, he was Ted Kirk who first sang this to me, but that was a version I got from Ted Hutchinson. In fact, 4 of the entries on Route 163 are from my collection, East Riding collection, but practically everybody who was in the farming community around there could at least sing the chorus, if not the whole thing. So that one's from Ted Hutchinson of Driffield, which was also on the map as a market town on the edge there. So what I'll do is I'll just, in case anyone's not familiar with the song, I'll just sing the first verse for you. I once was a jolly ploughboy, ploughing in the fields all day. When a very funny thought came across my mind, I thought I'd run away. For I'm sick and tired of the country life, the place where I was born. So I've been and joined the army, and I'm off tomorrow morn. So hurrah for the scarlet and the blue, see the helmets glisten in the sun, and the bayonets flash like lightning to the blast of a military drum. There's a flag in dear old England, proudly waving in the sky, and the last words of my comrades were, we'll conquer or we'll die. And having sung that, it's time for my annual advert, which I normally put on the trad song forum. We've got this song. It's known all over England, mostly from places that had Royal Artillery regiments locally, because they were noted for singing it. We can't go any further back. The only furthest reference we've got is from Essex. There's a reference in an Essex review for 1951 that says 1906, that it was known in 1906. All of the other versions relate back to World War I, and all the other versions that have been recorded and collected were, apart from Francis Collinson getting a few versions during World War II, are all from collectors like me from the 1960s and 70s onwards. Can we find an original? Well, I've been 50 years on this one, working on this one, trying to find where it came from. People like John Baxter, John Earl, who have large collections of sheet music. It doesn't occur in any of them. There are no references to it in any of the musical journals. It just seems to have appeared out of nowhere. One thing is, it is sort of a recruitment song, a recruiting song, even though it's obviously very much in the musical vein. I would think, I did try the Royal Artillery down in Woolwich, the Royal Artillery Centre down in Woolwich, and they'd never heard of it. They didn't know anything about it as well. Now, when it was recorded in the 50s and the 60s, in fact, famously recorded by the Watersons, our old friend Bert Lloyd put in the notes to that some rather odd Bertisms. One was, he said it had been written by John J. Blockley in 1870. Well, John J. Blockley was actually a composer, and he composed religious songs. I've got quite a lot of the sheet music of his, and it's just about all of it is religious songs. And there's no record anywhere of him ever writing or composing a song, anything like this one. Also, what Bert Lloyd said in his notes in various records that he did the notes for, he said that the song was in the repertoire of Harrigan and Hart. Well, Harrigan and Hart are about as American as Pumpkin Pie, and so it's highly unlikely that they sang this very English song here. They did actually sing a song in their repertoire called The Blue and the Grey, which he might have got confused over, which actually refers to the American Civil War, of the blue of the Unions and the grey of the Confederates. So also, if you are interested in trying to find out where it did come from, you might there are other songs called The Scarlet and the Blue. I think probably the original title was probably The Scarlet and the Blue, but there are 2 or 3 other songs from World War I and earlier called The Scarlet and the Blue. So make sure, if you are looking, that it's at least got that something like that first line there. Right, so that's the Jolly Ploughboy. ought to mention, of course, that there was an IRA parody of it, which I think people like the Dubliners sang, All Off to Dublin in the Green, which was obviously very much a version of this. Done the Bert Lloyd stuff. Yeah, so moving on to another song from Ted Kirk, then his second song from the Sykes's Regiment men was a song called The Artillery Alphabet. Ted only sang the first two verses of this for me. And you can see, probably those of you who are familiar with the Sailors song, the Sailors Alphabet, will probably recognize the chorus or elements of the chorus, and the tune has some relation to it as well. If you're not familiar with the Sailors Alphabet, I'll just sing you the first verse. A is for anchor, we carry on our bow. B is for bowsprit, the jibs all lie low. C is for capstan, which we run around. And D's for the davits to lower the boats down. Merrily, cheerily, so merry are we, no mortal on earth like a sailor at sea. Heave away, haul away, hey do or damn, give a sailor his grog and there's nothing goes wrong. And you can see a little bit of in the chorus there of similarity. If I sing the first verse of this version for you that we got from Ted, you can perhaps pick out the similarities there. I might also add there in as well that there is also a close relationship for you, the Americans who are listening here, to the shanty boys, the lumberjack alphabet as well, is very obviously related to this one as well. Is for artillery, the pride of the line. B's for battery, the battery sublime. C's for correction, which gives us the fuse. And D's for the drag ropes that we seldom use. Sing high, sing low, wherever we go. Artillery gunners will never say no. And probably, I would think most of you have never heard the song before, not this particular alphabet anyway. It is very scarce. In fact, I got the other verses from writing to, as I said, the Royal Artillery headquarters down in Woolwich in London. And they sent me the rest of the verses there, well, the whole thing, in fact. But they had, they said that the song was very popular with the Royal Artillery in India during the 1930s. And their chorus is even more like the Sailors Alphabet. I'll not sing it because I don't actually have the tune for this. It could be the Sailors Alphabet tune. It could be more close to this alphabet tune. It goes, singing merry and merry and merry are we. We are the boys of the artillery. Blow high, blow low, wherever you go, we go. We're all jolly fellows when out on a spree. Okay, that's those two songs then. And I have another song that obviously came out from the First World War. I ran a ceilidh band for many, many years. Well, I was part of a ceilidh band from 1969 right up to retiring from teaching in the noughties, around about 2003. And there were during that time, there were lots, I had a big turnover of different musicians. And at one point in the 80s, the band split up into two bands. And they wanted, it was a family thing, a family wanted to form their own family ceilidh band. And so I was without a lead musician for that period. And an accordion player in another local ceilidh band mentioned that there was a young lad looking for work who'd been learnt his trade in a local accordion band. And so I quickly snapped him up and he became the lead musician in our ceilidh band then, Andy Watson. And he was with us for about 10 years when he happened casually to mention that he'd got this tape recording of when he was a boy playing in this band, this accordion band, and they'd been playing for some old people in the Guildhall in Hull, and they'd somehow left the tape running when a cassette tape it was. They'd left this cassette tape running, and during the interval, and an old lady had just stood up and launched into the song called Headington Road Jail. So if we could just have the song Headington Road Jail. There it is, right. And those of you who are familiar with the jail songs, particularly those on the broadsides, will note the first verse and second verse there are pretty typical of the prison songs that occur on broadsides and in oral tradition as well. But this one has got quite a lot of differences. If you look at the last line of the chorus there, it's a ruddy, rotten prison for a soldier. What happened there was Headington Road Jail, which is in Hull, where I'm from, during World War I was actually a prison. It was used for miscreant soldiers and people like deserters and conscientious objectors, things like that. And that's what this particular one goes. So we'll have a go. I'll have a go at singing this for you. How many time? Yeah, we've just got time to sing it for you, and we'll finish with that. At 6 o'clock the bells do ring for every man to rise, to wash and scrub his little cell and the place he occupies, all around old Headington Road Jail, where you do no talking, all around old Headington Road Jail, where you do. When you tease in tarry oakum, Hessian mailbags in your cell, take warning what I've said, it's a ruddy, rotten prison for a soldier. At 7 o'clock, skilly comes in, skilly boiling knots. It's sometimes thick and it's sometimes thin, and a pint is all you've got, all around old Headington Road Jail, where you do no talking, all around old Headington Road Jail, when you tease in tarry oakum, Hessian mailbags in your cell, take warning what I've said, it's a ruddy, rotten prison for a soldier. And Headington Road prison smells, and the bells are made of brass. And now I've done my 6 months, you can stick it right up your round old Headington Road Jail, etc. And I think I'd better finish there.
Thank you, Steve. Lovely. I forgot what I was going to say. You just stumped me into silence. We have a few minutes for questions or comments. It's interesting that none of those are anything like the sort of, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag or Tipperary or anything. The songs that we think we know from the First World War. John Baxter, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, it was just about the particularly in the First World War, but probably in other wars as well. The troops obviously went off and sang their own songs and made up their own words and came up with new songs. And it does get very confusing there are some music hall songs which actually seem to have been written by the troops on the front line and then seem to have been written down by people in this country and claimed as their own to gain the copyright and so on. So things like Hinky Dinky Parlez-Vous is probably something that was made up by the troops on the front line. I am working through a huge sort of 600 or 700 early 20th century music hall songs that were published in the Weekly Dispatch, which became, I think, the Sunday Express, which has just been digitized. And I've just come across a song this morning called The Boys in Scarlet and Gold, which is not the same song, but might be someone trying to copy. Because that's what they did as well, is you find that there are people parodies. Writing but not even parodies, songs that are very like the other one because they want people to hatch on to the success of another song and say, I've got a song with Scarlet and the Gold, or they advertise it in their hoardings and so on, as it's sort of copying the success of another song. So I'll send you the details of that one. It's not the Scarlet and the Blue, but it might be a copy of the Scarlet and the Blue.
Well, my advert was very much aimed at you, John, anyway.
Yeah, you remind me every year to have another look.
I will, yeah.
Well, we expect you to come up with these, John, because, what's the point of having an expert if he doesn't come up with the goods? So, keep at it. Conrad has the only other question. Anybody else apart from Conrad, and then anyone else? No, Conrad, you first. Next.
I think he probably left his hand up.
Where's
From
your hand
last time.
still up from
No,
last
I'm
time?
here.
Oh, there, he's there.
Are you? Have you got your hand up?
Yeah, hands up, and it's up, both of them, and that one. But that's all I've got. But the song I'm thinking of that I've been running into more often than not in my studies is Orange, also an Orange song of Alphabet, which is also a very interesting little song. It combines all of the aspects of Orangism in one song. Very useful for learning, I guess, about what the hell they do. But there's a song for you, for your alphabet song.
Ah,
I think every trade or bunch of people had an alphabet song, didn't they?
Seems like it. I've seen several.
Yeah.
They go back. The alphabet songs obviously go back a long way, and but a lot of them are different, not related to each other. Whereas the sailors' alphabet, the 3 or 4 that I mentioned are. They obviously, one influence the other sort of thing, rather than just being a straightforward alphabet song, or even recital. I can mention a little bit. I can go a little bit further if there's no questions. Also, on the staff of the school where I was teaching was a history teacher who had been around during World War II. So this is moving on to World War II, really. He had been in intelligence just after the war, in the army intelligence, and his job was to go around sort of debriefing all the sort of military people in Europe and get information from them. And whilst he was doing that, he was also actively gathering their songs for his own amusement. I don't think he was, in the terms of a folk song collector per se, but he was, he was actually gathering them, and he could remember lots and lots of them. And I recorded lots of them. I'll just, how was the time? Yeah, I'll just read out a quick list, and I'll be using some of these in my next one about World War II. Things like 7 Nights Drunk, The Lobster Song, the Somersetshire Troop Ship, which is a medley of tunes, Saida Bint, a racist Egyptian one, the Shiba Blues about the Gulf of Aden, the Corps of Royal Engineers song, which is a well-known, the Zulu warrior, the Poor Aviator Lay Dying, a lot of these are in the World War II books as well. This Old Coat of Mine, where they perform the striptease, which was related to All For Me Grog. Baby Lie Easy, Rocking the Cradle, that one. McCaffrey, of course, was in there, and I've got McCaffrey from a few people. Even sort of things like Died for Love that I've gone over in previous presentations, with Soldier substituted for Sailor. Cyrene Murray, a South African pop song from World War II. Things like Maggie May, the Liverpudlian song, and stuff like that. And that's what I will include more detail on things like that. That George Collinson, the history teacher, I recorded from him. Okay.
Great, thank you, Steve, and perfect timing because it's just coming up 5:30 here in England.
Steve, I was intrigued by your comment that all trades would have this the alphabet song. So could you give us a quick rendition of the Librarians alphabet song, please?
No, I'm sorry, it's too rude for me to sing in public. So you'll have to come to a librarians meeting to hear that. Anyway, thank you to our 3 speakers today, Patience, Richard and Steve. As always, thank you to everybody who came along. Thank you to Martin and Sean and Nora for running the show. And don't forget, we're going to see you again on July the 10th. And in the meantime, look after yourselves. All right.
Goodbye.